There's unconsciously bad, where you write and this is the greatest thing ever. Oh, I'm going to be the next best-selling. I'm going to be New York Times. I'm going to be on TVs, and my book's going to be a movie. And you're like, you're 10.
Oh, yeah.
But you have such high hopes for this. You're unconsciously bad. And then you're consciously bad. You start seeing what the good literature is. And you go, I have a lot to learn. Consciously bad. You know that you're not where you could be. And then from there, you get to unconsciously good. You start writing, and now you're just doing it for the fun of it. Now you're just trying to learn everything you can. And at some point, you realize, I'm getting better. And then the last stage, consciously good, where you know what you're doing is good for your genre, good for what you want to achieve with your writing, and then you stick with it and you just keep growing and learning. Stay in the unconsciously bad and consciously bad stages as long as possible. Like, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but that's going to be the most fun years of your writing.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Her Reading Life podcast. If this is your first time here, welcome. My name is Shida Rodriguez, and I'm here to help you find life-changing books and to write life-changing stories. Before we jump into today's episode, definitely be sure to subscribe, like, and comment what you're working on, like projects that you're working on, or your favorite quote from this episode. We really want to be here to support you and to help you and to serve you as best as we can. So if you ever have any ideas, feel free to comment below something that you'd like to see on the podcast or just some amazing ideas that you have. We love hearing from you and really want to support you in whatever capacity I can and just really bring you content that helps you become a better person, 1% better every single day. This podcast is also available wherever you listen to podcasts, so that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a whole bunch of the others that I didn't even know until we started distributing there. So definitely check out the podcast there and rate it if you have been enjoying these episodes. If you've ever wondered what it takes to actually write a best-selling book, like you've actually thought, okay, that would be incredible. Like if I could write a book, that'd be amazing. If I could write a best-selling book, that would be even better. Like how cool would that be? Well, friends, guess what? It's not that hard. It is not that impossible. And to prove it, I've actually brought an incredible guest with me today who actually got to write a best-selling fantasy novel on Amazon. And she published it before the age of 18. Like, how crazy is that? And you know, I've found that fantasy is a huge genre today. But most of us don't really know how to harness it. Most of us don't really know how to not just use the genre to its fullest advantage, but actually create stories that are not just cookie cutter, but that are really unique and beautiful, and that actually take the fact that a lot of these fantasy stories are dark and turns it on its head so that we use the darkness for light. And so that way it gives you the feeling of the perfect fantasy book that has some dark, has some light, and is just perfect for really being able to help you escape and yet come back into life better than you came. Isabella will be sharing her story in just a bit, but kind of wanted you to have a bit of an idea of who she is. She's a teenage author from Southern Alabama who aims to inspire and entertain with her stories of hope in the dark. With almost 7 years of writing experience under her belt, she's excited to share her books with the world, and she also wrote, like I mentioned before, her best-selling novel, The Darkest War, which I am so excited for you to be able to hear her talk more about. So if you've ever wondered how you can write a best-selling book, we're going to be discussing that in this 2 or 3 part episode. Because I'm not sure exactly how it's going to pan out. It was such a really in-depth conversation that we had. So we're going to be talking about how to write that best-selling book. We're going to be talking about how to write that perfect fantasy book that delves into dark themes yet still gives hope. And whether Christians can write fantasy with dark themes, how, why, all the things, all the questions. We're going to be diving right into that right now. Welcome, Isabella. I'm so absolutely thrilled to be able to bring you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it was just so fun to be able to connect with another writer. It's always so fun. So let's just jump right in because I would love to hear your story. What's your story? What inspired you to start writing and helped you fall in love with your novel's premise?
Yeah, so I started writing when I was about 12. My aunt had got me into the Hunger Games series, and from there, she just started getting me to read more and more books. And I had never been a big reader. I was one of those people that's like, I don't like reading. And so when I started reading this, and I was like, people create things and these stories with their minds. And I had no idea that people did this. And it was completely new to me. Like, I just had no idea. And from there, it was like, well, I wonder if I could do this. And I just started out writing my own little stories, started with Hunger Games fan fiction. And then it went on from there. I should create my own thing. Like, I could do this. And that's kind of how I got into writing. So.
That's so fun. I love that. And it's crazy how like there's this like one series that will like catapult you into reading more books or things like that. And it was so funny because my sister had like the same experience where she was like, I didn't really like reading that much until I read this one series and then it just plunged me into a whole reading thing.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly how it was for me, is I just realized, oh, this is something I like. There are books I like. And that's kind of just what, like you said, catapulted me into reading. I just had to find a series I liked.
I love that. And
Yeah.
then I'd love to hear what made you fall in love like with your novel's premise? Because how did you go like from Hunger Games to the fantasy books that you're writing now?
So it took me a while. I tried many different genres. Because at first I was like, oh, I should do dystopian. And I don't think 12-year-old me knew that there was other genres besides dystopian, honestly, because that's all I read for a while. And I love dystopian to this day. I'll read it. I just can't write it. And I learned that pretty quickly. Well, it took a couple of years. So then I went from dystopian to contemporary, and I tried mystery and horror and all of the things. And nothing ever really like clicked. I was never found something that I could write, and I felt like I was bringing something new to the table. It just felt like I was copying things, which, I mean, it's fun when you're 12 to copy Hunger Games in your own little drafts on your computer. It doesn't do well in the marketing world very long, unless you just market it as the next Hunger Games, which I didn't really want to do.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I need my own, series. So I started reading other genres and other things and just really delving into my options. My aunt, she'd get me more books. Usually my cousin was a big reader, so she would just tell me what my cousin read when, she was my age, when she was growing up in the 2010s of Twilight and Hunger Games and Divergent and all the new things. And finally, she had me read the Selection series by Kiera Cass, which is it's sort of dystopian in the sense that it's set in the future, but society went back into a monarchy. And I had never read something like that. I mean, it was completely new to me. And I was like, I love this blend of these two different things. I found out I love reading royalty stories. And then it was really just, I had an obsession with royalty things, all the things. I did so much research and I was just so into how court life went and the politics of everything. And it was very interesting to me. And then I just decided I want to try this, because I've been obsessed with it for so long.
I love that. Yeah, I love that it took a little while to find your genre because it happens. Like we're like, my goodness, we start even questioning whether we're good writers, but it's sometimes not about being a good writer or a bad writer. It's just finding that place that you're called to, finding your field, finding that thing that like really resonates with you and that you're really good at and that you enjoy writing and that other people will enjoy reading. And that, like you said, I love that you pointed that out, like that you brought something new to the table.
Yeah. I'd written a couple dystopian novels when I was 15. And I mean, I like the characters. I hated the plot line. I loved the characters. And even now to this day, I still love those characters and have always hoped that, I could use them. They wouldn't fit in a royalty setting now, half their personality was the cool dystopian world they were in. But I didn't care for the plot and I couldn't keep going. I love trilogies, and so I wanted it to be a trilogy. And I got the first novel done halfway through the second and decided I have no idea what I'm doing. And it was not for me. And no matter how hard I tried, I even did a second draft of the first one. I did a second draft of the second one. I tried so hard to make this work. It was not working. And then the following year is when I started what is now The Darkest War.
That's amazing. I love that. Yeah. Wow. Well, speaking of like your books and how they were inspired by a lot of other books that you really enjoyed, what are some of your favorite life-changing books? So, if you can give me like three of your favorite life-changing books, which would they be?
I kind of mentioned it, but it is life-changing for me, the Selection series, because it did introduce me into a whole new world of, books and writing. So the Selection series definitely, because it introduced me into my genre. And then the Twilight Saga by Stephanie Meyer. A lot of people probably wouldn't consider this a life-changing book. It's one of those books that people go, that's a book for entertainment. It's a vibe book. You just like the vibes. It's not helpful. It was helpful to me because I loved the writing style. And I really adopted it for a while, and it really helped me. I've always struggled with the show don't tell. And Twilight is very descriptive. They'll spend 20 pages on one thought, and some people hate it. I love it. And so it helped me balance out things some more. So I really liked the writing style, and it helped me a lot. Yeah, it was really good for me at the time too, because it was also what got me into fantasy. So I mean, if you can call Twilight, kind of a modern thing, but in its own right, it's fantasy. And so it also kind of, while I was reading Selection, then I went straight to that, and it kind of formed, whatever I'm doing now. And then I would say the third would be The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, which a lot of people read this when they're in 8th grade in school. I'm homeschooled, so I didn't get that. I just had a bunch of friends clamoring me at one time because they'd all read it. And they all went, you have to read this book, and we all read it for school. And because, it's just one of those books everyone gets in 8th grade, I had so many people at once just have to read this. And I did, and it was amazing. And I think that book really introduced me into the art of emotions, like character emotions, because it's very character based. Everything that happens is character driven, either through choices that, form the plot and, so on. And so it really was like, there are books that, because let's be honest, I was reading so many YA books, shallow as they may be. I loved them. And this was my first like deep book. And it was like, love this. People write tragedy. It was, the entire story is very sad. And it was like, oh my goodness, I love this. And I even had my own go at a story similar to it, at least with some of the themes, and I made a novella out of it. Not something I'll ever do with anything, but it was fun to write. So that was another thing.
I love that. And yeah, that's so true. I love how you were talking about like the character development. It's so like those character development books are so good. Like not the character development books, like the character driven stories.
Yes.
They are so good.
All of my stuff now is character driven. And I think that's half my problem is dystopian very much revolves around plot for the most part. And if you just take characters and you can put them in a court setting, in a kingdom, there's a lot of room for characters to do things that will shape the plot because action consequence. And I feel like that's also where that formed, is because now all my stuff is very character driven. Even when I'm creating a story, the first thing I'll do is create characters.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I find it really interesting because I feel like plot driven stories are good, and I think there has to be a balance of both.
Yes, obviously.
But I feel like a good story is going to think, how is this particular character going to act when they're faced with this plot point or this challenge?
Yes.
And that is what makes them so interesting. And I feel like even quiet stories that are very character driven, I think they're so intriguing because of the fact that you often put unlikely characters in unlikely situations.
Yes.
Or with unlikely other characters that you're like, oh, that's why we all love like the grumpy sunshine kind of trope, because we're like, this person would never actually get along with this person. How are they going to get along? And we're just watching to see how they get along, especially when the plot puts them in this really uncomfortable situation for both of them. And we're just watching to see how it all pans out. People truly underestimate how much writing depends on people and on meeting people and watching people and being able to interact with people. And something that has really enabled me to do this in a way that I totally would not have been able to do it is this podcast. But let me tell you, at the beginning, it was tough. Editing things down, writing the scripts, it was quite a process, for sure. And frankly, even today, editing takes a lot of my time when it comes to producing these episodes. That is why I am so thrilled that for this episode, I actually worked with Riverside. This episode, frankly, this episode would probably be impossible without Riverside. Riverside FM is a remote recording platform. It allows you to record, edit using a text-based editor, and promote your podcasts directly to Spotify. You're also able to even use their incredible tools that will select parts of your podcast to share on social media. And friends, you have no idea how much time this has saved me. I used it for this episode, and this episode, genuinely, to get it as professionally edited and as clean and precise as it turned out, it would have taken me easily 2 to 3 hours. And I was able to do this edit, which has been cleaner than any of my other edits, in about an hour and a half. That is giving me 1 to 2 hours back of my life that otherwise would never have been coming back to me. And all of this is possible because of Riverside. If you're a creator, imagine what you could do with cutting down your production time and making your videos even more professional with less time. It's truly incredible, and I am kind of raving about it right now. Maybe you have a dream to be able to create your own podcast, to be able to create your own YouTube channel. You're like, this seems so cool. I wish I could do something like this, but I just don't know how. I don't feel like I have the technology. Friend, if you can type on a keyboard, you can edit your video, because Riverside's incredible editing tools allow you to be able to edit your podcast in the same way that you would edit a document, because it's text-based. So whatever you're saying in the video will come up on the screen, and it will erase and clean things up so that you have minimal work to do. You don't have to be worrying about the waveforms or any of that, and it will even clean up your audio for you. In fact, this has been saving me so much time and adding so much value to my life that I literally invested in this for my podcast, because truly I believe that this was totally worth investing in. So if you would like to learn more about Riverside or try it out for free, because it is completely free to try out, and I'm not talking about trial, you can actually try it out with the whole suite of tools. Definitely click the link in the description and I will see you there.
Yes, exactly. And I heard this analogy a couple days ago and I loved it. And it was like, when you're a writer, your entire job is just to throw as many things as you can on your character and see how they handle it. And it was actually I want to say it was a podcast about Gilmore Girls, which I love Gilmore Girls. And somebody was talking about one of the insane things that happened in one of the seasons. They were like, this character would never do this. And they were like, okay, but that's because up until this point, we hadn't seen how much we could handle and throw at the character.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, because the writer's whole job is to make this character's life as difficult as possible and have them figure it out. Exactly. And I love doing that with my characters, honestly. There are some times I have to not do that because I know what they'll do in those situations, and then the book's over.
Exactly, yeah. And it's really interesting when you put them into situations that they normally where they act anti everything that they say that they believe. So like, how much it's almost like a game of how much can I push this character outside of their comfort zone to the point that they almost would do something that they would say, I would never do that. What lengths do you have to go to see them really reveal their true character? And like life, that's kind of what happens. You see people sometimes do things out of the blue and you're like, how on earth did they do that? I never expected that from this person. And sometimes if you put them in certain circumstances, people will actually act completely different from what they normally will do.
Of course, it's so interesting. And I think that's where, a little off topic, the importance of psychology is so important in writing. I spent a good chunk of my semester studying psychology in junior year, just for writing, honestly, because it was so helpful, and it just helps you learn a lot more about your characters and learn how to tweak them and help them go along the plot when you can understand their motives and, what a person would or would not do in a certain situation.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yeah, same. I love psychology, and it teaches you so much about characters, the why they do things, because at the center of all, I think every story really boils down to why did they do this? Even murder mysteries. Like, there are murder mysteries where you see what happened. We're not even watching for the who done it. We're watching for the why done it.
Yes, exactly. You're like, we know someone did it, but why?
Exactly. Especially, in fact, I feel like the most interesting mysteries are the things where even after we explain what happened, we're like, but wait a minute, like, why would this happen? Why would they go to these lengths to do this?
Yes. I just said I agree.
Yeah, I was watching actually kind of off topic, but I was watching an episode from Sherlock recently, and I think it was like the first episode or something like that. And in the scene, Sherlock was talking to the guy who was like the serial killer. And even after he's talking to him and explaining how he did everything, we're still intrigued. We're not satisfied until we know the why. We're like, okay, this makes sense, but why would you do this? Why are you doing this? And I feel like we have to kind of approach characters almost like a murder mystery, even if it's not a murder mystery, but ask your characters, hey, why are you doing this? Like, what is really at the heart of them, and why do they do what they do, and why do they care so much? And sometimes, what are they hiding?
Absolutely. I actually have a murder mystery, like kind of a subplot in the series. It does get resolved at the end of book one. So it's kind of just like a book one thing that kind of sets up for the villain of the story. And that was one of the most fun parts, I will be honest. But it was very fun. And his backstory for why he did it, I did not even create that until I was almost done with the book. And it was the most fun part because I was like, see, he's got kind of a reason.
Yeah.
And you can justify, I mean, you shouldn't, but like as a writer, you can justify your character through anything if you just, give them a sad enough backstory.
Yeah, totally. And it actually spices things up, to be quite honest.
It does, because I've had people tell me and they're like, so we still hate him, but he's got a point.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
That is legitimately like all readers were like, we hate him, but yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And so we sort of love him.
Dots are connecting.
Exactly. I know that your stories lean more towards like the fantasy, romance, romantasy, royalty genre, which I love, by the way. And these genres have really been popularized lately by the rise of books like Throne of Glass series, Cruel Prince, etc. But I would love to hear how you approach writing fantasy with dark themes as a Christian. I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so this is such an interesting topic, and this was one of my favorite questions. This is such a heavy layered one, so if I take some rabbit trails, just
Go ahead.
I might take some rabbit trails and get lost a little bit along the way. I think it's really important as a Christian to not shy away from these things because they're important. They happen whether or not we talk about them. My book deals with some heavy topics such as grief, trauma, abuse, death, things like that are very heavy and that are real. I mean, even the Bible talks about these things, obviously. I mean, so there's definitely, you can do it. I just think, for me personally, it was very important to me to not glorify them. I love a good traumatized character, but sometimes you can take it too far. I love a character you can sympathize with. I love a character that you can, relate to, even if you don't have the same things as characters does. We all relate to in some sort of way. We've all had something. But there's also, this is very controversial, there is a rise of modern day books glorifying these dark topics.
Girl, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to say that sometimes I don't go scout out a sad book because, I'm in my feels. I want a good sad book, Yeah. But it does happen too often. And the amount of times that I've picked up a book and I've gone, oh, there's really good representation of this important topic in this book. It's mentioned once and then it's never brought up again. And it happens a lot, actually. And that was something I did not want to do. I knew going into this book that I wanted to deal with hard topics in this book, and I knew I wanted it to be something that was a part of their character arc, not just a character quirk, but a part of their growth as a character, that they were going to deal with this thing and they were going to get over it, and they were, even if they didn't get over it completely, they were going to learn that things could get better, even if it wasn't on screen, on page. Even if it wasn't on page, things were going to, they had some sort of hope. And that's very important to me, is making sure that there is hope. And there will be times I'll read a book and it'll just end so devastatingly. And I'm like, what was the point? I'm like, there was no message under there. It was just to be sad. And sometimes, not that I can't watch a good sad movie or read a good sad book and, appreciate it for what it is. But like I said, there are so many times where things are added in there just to be added. They're not there for a message. And I believe every book, even if you don't intend it to have a message, will have a message. Because subconsciously, people are very subconscious people.
Yes.
And you put things in your writing, and when you do a reread, edits, whatever, you'll see it there. And then you have the option to lean into that. And that's what I did, kind of, because I really didn't mean for it to have some kind of message. I don't think subconsciously I did. And then when I went back, I was like, oh, there's so many things here. I can connect these. And I did. So I think that was one of the most important things for me, is not glorifying it and making sure if it's going to be in there, it's going to serve a purpose.
Exactly.
If I'm putting it in there, someone should get something out of this. That was very important to me, because there is a lot of representation of dark and hard, difficult topics in books. I mean, it's in every book, because you got to have some kind of conflict. But what was strange to me is I read all these books and they never dealt with it, and it was never something that carried out. It was never carried out. It was there for a couple pages, and then it fizzled out. And I understand that also from a writer's, because it's hard to keep up with that. Sometimes you just want to make your characters happy, and you don't want to make them keep going. So you're like, I'll push this to the back burner.
Yeah.
But I feel as writers, we have a job, and we have, the responsibility to work on things. Not that you have to. There's people who really just write things for the aesthetic of things, and I do that as well. That's very much my inspiration for a lot of things, honestly, is, oh, I love this aesthetic. I should write a book about that. But if you're going to do it well. That would be what I try to stick by.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love how you were talking about how there are some books that, they just kind of get stuck in that thing. They either don't deal with it or they deal with it, but kind of oh, this is what it is. Just accept it. That's okay. You have to live with that thing.
Yeah.
For the rest of your life and stay in that same state instead of growing. And I love how you said that there's no arc, because it's so true. There's innately characters need to change. Of course, there are characters that are static characters, but especially if it's a main character or a significant role, a character that is a side character but has a significant role in the story, you can't just leave them as there. That's just kind of defeating the point of a story, which is why I think that good books will leave you with that feeling of, oh my goodness, that was such a good story. I want to read it over again. Now that I know the end, I want to read everything with a different perspective. But I feel like when books don't leave us with that something at the end where we're like, wow, our time was not wasted, because we invest a lot of time in our books. The reason why we're attracted to books, I think, is because innately books, especially fiction stories, they teach us to grow, I think. In a way, like you said, subconsciously, consciously, they teach us to become better somehow, either through the character's positive growth or even through a negative arc. We think, I see where this road lies. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be like that character. And in a way, those characters teach us about ourselves. They teach us about the people we want to be and the people we don't want to be. They teach us about the people we want to associate ourselves with. They teach us about how to see life not just as something that we exist in, but as a story that is still working itself out and unfolding as people come into our lives and step out of our lives and things happen and we change and we grow. I feel like books teach us and help us to become those people subconsciously most of the time, but some people can kind of detect on that, consciously, like you have.
Yeah, and like you were saying, you feel like you should get something out of the book by the end of it. One of my favorite books, it's a standalone, and it's very short. It's 200 pages, maybe. And it's probably the saddest book I've ever read. And I read it, and even though it was so sad, it ended on such a note where the character looked through all the sad things that happened, and he realized that was life, and not in the things that, oh, this is just life, that this is life and that hard things are a part of it, but this makes me human. And it was such an eye-opening thing, because I feel like everyone has a tendency a little bit to look at things and go, oh, this is the end of the world, I hate things. And at least one point in your life, we've all felt like that. And the book just gave me such a sense of, yes, but that's what makes you human, and you grow through it. And I read the book. 5 days later, I did a reread, because I could not get it out of my head. And even though it is one of the saddest books I've ever read, it was stuck with me because of the ending, because of that underlying message.
Yes, that's beautiful. I love that. Yes, I love those books that they make you want to reread the book, because you see everything in a completely new light and a completely new perspective.
Yes, exactly.
I love that. So now that we've talked a little bit about like books and creating a character arc that really grows through those difficult topics. How do you actually weave this into your own writing? How do you weave them tactfully and tastefully into your own fantasy world and narrative without being on the nose or cheesy about it, while also addressing it in a way that won't glorify it, like you were mentioning earlier? I'd love to hear like some tips and tricks that you have for like actually writing that stuff.
Yeah, of course. Like I said, I did a lot of psychology work. Um, because I really believe that a lot of things that stay with you, that will make your character, where this is something they're going to deal with over the course of your book, it's something that's also very mental. And I think that helped a lot, really, making sure that before I ever wrote anything, I understood it. I didn't write from a place of, let's write and figure out how this might be like for the character. Even though I am very much a pantser, so it was difficult for me. I wanted to know what I was portraying, and I wanted to portray it well. I wanted to make sure that I dealt with it responsibly, tastefully, and that I make sure that I didn't ever put it in a bad light or the character in a bad light. Because that's another thing, is you never want to make the character look in a certain light that, maybe that's not how it works. So that was one thing, is I made sure to understand before I wrote. And sometimes that happened in the editing phase. Sometimes that happened in revisions, where I realized, hey, I could have handled this topic a lot better, and I need to do more research, and this needs to go on the back burner until I can figure this out. And sometimes that had to happen, and it was a little frustrating, but I really believe that it all starts with research, just understanding. And that was another thing, is some things came easier than others, because some of the things that I wrote with my characters, I understood, and I was going through myself, and I channeled that to characters. So sometimes it was easier to not make things cheesy because I was going through it myself, and that made it easier to, write. And as for just not making it so on the nose, so difficult, because you want to just present the problem, and you want to say, this is the issue. But sometimes that can scare off readers, and sometimes that can make them go, okay, this is a lot to deal with, this is a lot to take in. And it's just throwing a curveball, like, hey, everything was normal, and now suddenly this character has this terrible problem to deal with, and this is stressful. I mean, I feel like we all read to escape our own stresses. At least a lot of people say that, and that's true for me. And so sometimes you don't want to read, and you don't want to get overwhelmed, and you don't want to, sometimes if you just want a good, happy book, you don't want to pick up a book and sob for 2 hours. Sometimes there's books for every occasion, and I knew what kind mine was. And so my book is very much for the people who have dealt with things, who are dealing with things, or maybe who just want a better perspective on things. And so I knew that I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just throwing them at it. But also, you have to have that level of, not shock factor, because, don't ever use issues for shock factor. Yeah, no. But that level of realization, where you go, oh, wow, this is a problem. And this is, and I think the most important thing, when you want to make it not cheesy, make them realize this is an issue, is really just handling it with a realistic and heavy hand. Just be very realistic about the things, which I guess goes back to research. It all goes back to that for me. I love researching things and learning about things. Maybe I'm biased, but that would be the most thing, is just dealing with it realistically. And like I said, no one wants to read a book that just goes, here's the issue, do with it what you like. Books will always teach you something. Like you said, either I want to be like this character, I don't want to be like this character, I want to learn this lesson, I need to stay away from this. And as a writer, you're presenting information to your reader, even if it's biased information, because we're all biased on something. We all have our subjective point of views, and there's also an objective, but writers always have something subjective, especially when you're dealing with topics, because everyone has their own opinion on how to deal with that. So you're presenting information, and you have to learn how to hand it to them in a way that's like, not like, here's the issues, here it is, have fun, but like slowly giving it out to them and weaving it in a way that's respectful, in a way that doesn't just throw it in their face.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
I always find it crazy how, when you're reading a book, most of the times you can guess, because I do deal with one character is very represents he goes through a lot of trauma stuff and a lot of abuse, and that's very heavy for this one character in the book. And I won't spoil because it's not revealed until later in the book. But I always made sure to leave clues. And so it wasn't just thrown on them. Things that maybe like things that were said or things that, he maybe remembered certain small things from his past or childhood or things that were kind of woven in there so that when you got to it, it goes, oh my goodness, I had no idea this poor character. You go, that makes sense. And there's a lot of books that do this really well. And I'll even text my friend sometimes, and we do a lot of buddy reading together, and I'll be like, is this character, does he have this thing, like this trauma? That sounds so bad, but sometimes you can really just guess. And it's never, I never think of it like, oh, how terrible, the author let us know ahead of time. It's like, no, this was intentional. Because you have to make sure that the reader sees it coming, so it's not just thrown in their face. You have to make sure that it makes sense. And that's another thing that I really respect about the mystery genre. Can't write it to save my life, but I've tried. But there was a piece of advice I'd heard, and it was like, you never want to make your reader in mystery, you never want to make your reader go, I feel so stupid. How did I not get that? Like, you never want them to go, this was like, you just threw this at me and I had no chance to find this out. You want to make them go, my goodness, I should have seen this coming. It makes sense now. And I understand. And it makes them feel like they're figuring it out too. And a lot of time with dark themes in books, you want them to go, this makes sense that this fits in here, that this piece fits in with this character.
Precisely.
Instead of going, why in the world is this in here? That really just hit me for a curveball. So that would be one of my big things, is these little clues. That's what I always do. It is a very mental thing when characters are dealing with dark topics. It affects the characters, it affects people, but it's also cause and effect. They're going to have signs, and like a character may be dealing with grief, they're not going to hold up perfectly. The strongest character, is going to have some breaking point, and that's usually where characters get interested. But things like that, that's sort of how I try to attempt it and try to handle it, just realistically, and, not just throwing it in the reader's face.
It is so easy to look at other people's journeys and think, oh my goodness, they got a bestseller because they're so smart. They're so much smarter than me. Oh my goodness, they wrote an incredible story because they're so much better than me. They're more talented. They're more this, they're more that. But you know what? The more you talk to people, the more you talk to writers, the more you even listen to people who have accomplished great things, the more you realize they are more like you than you could ever realize. They are regular people just like you who decided to take the leap. That's the only thing that separates you from them. They took the leap. They decided to say, okay, wait a minute. What am I going to regret more? Am I going to regret doing this or not doing this? Am I going to look back at my life and say, man, if I'd only written that book, man, if I'd only started that podcast, if I'd only started that YouTube channel, if I'd only decided to go out and meet some new friends, anything that you do, it starts with a bit of a risk. And that is the beautiful thing, I think, about being able to hear these stories from writers and artists and all these incredible people who took the leap, who decided that the fear was just not worth it, who decided to make a difference and to realize that they had something unique to tell. They had a unique story to tell. I love how Isabella was talking about finding her genre. It is so hard sometimes when you're trying to find your genre, when you're trying to find the place that you belong, Find that thing that really makes your heart beat and that you could forget about eating, you could forget about sleeping because you're so excited. You're so thrilled to do it over and over again. It just thrills you. It makes you feel alive. I assure you, it's there. And sometimes the leap is to simply take some time and discover the things that you are passionate about. Take some time this week maybe and start jotting down some ideas of what are things that I love? What are things that I love to read? What are things that make me excited? What are things that completely shift my day when I do them? Whether it's sports, whether it's writing, whether it's photography, whether it's creating videos, whatever, you name it. You can do it. Take that leap today. So that's my little encouragement to you. I hope this inspires you to realize that you are only a step away from accomplishing your dreams. Whoever you are, whatever you want to do, It's in your hands and you can choose to chase it. So I hope that this episode has been encouraging and inspiring, and definitely tune in next time because we're going to be talking even more about how Isabella was able to get a bestseller on Amazon, which I was just like, how on earth do you do that? It's actually so much more simple than you can even imagine. And I'm so excited for you to be able to hear how she did that and the story behind it. It's so fun. So definitely tune in next time. And until next time, continue to live, give, and repeat. And I will see you